A neglected girl, coughing up blood, was turned away at the door of the hospital that was supposed to save her. When the powerful owner of the place walked by, she screamed something that paralyzed everyone. "My mom said if I died, I was supposed to give you this letter." The blood-stained paper bore the signature of a woman the millionaire had loved and abandoned years ago. What happened next would forever change both of their destinies. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories. Every day, the millionaire gazed at the city through the mirrored windows of his penthouse office. Below, ordinary people moved like ants, hurried and insignificant in his calculating eyes. He checked his platinum watch, a gift from an Arab sheik after closing a billion-dollar deal, and adjusted his custom-made Italian tie. The afternoon would be dedicated to inspecting his latest investment, City General Hospital, acquired 2 months ago when it was in dire financial straits. His phone buzzed with messages from shareholders, numbers, charts, cold analyses. He smiled with satisfaction. In just 60 days, he had implemented strategic cuts that reversed losses into significant profits. Efficiency was his trademark. "The car is ready, sir," announced his assistant from the door without raising his submissive eyes. Meanwhile, miles away, in a tiny apartment with peeling walls, a 12-year-old girl was trying to wake her mother. The room smelled of medicine, cheap disinfectant, and that indescribable odor that prolonged suffering imprints on environments. "Mom, it's time for your medicine," she whispered, touching the woman's burning forehead. There was no response except for her irregular breathing. The girl coughed violently, covering her mouth with a cloth already stained red. Her own fever burned, ignored for days as she cared for her mother. On the bedside table, a sealed, yellowed letter rested next to an old photo. A smiling young woman in a nurse's uniform next to an elegant man whose face had been scribbled out with a pen. "If I die," the woman's hoarse voice startled her daughter, "you go to that hospital and give this to the owner. He'll take care of you." "Don't talk like that, Mom. You're going to get better." The woman didn't respond. Her gaze lost focus as her breathing became increasingly shallow. The girl panicked, shaking her mother's shoulders with growing desperation. Shouts for help echoed through the building's hallway, but the neighbors, accustomed to the misery of others, only turned up the volume on their televisions. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics exchanged somber glances. "Where do we take her?" one of them asked mechanically. The girl, with trembling hands, held the letter like a talisman and replied, "City General, please." On the way, she watched the divided city from the window. On one side, imposing buildings reflecting the sun. On the other, the forgotten outskirts sinking into the shadows. Her mother always told her that they belonged to neither world. They were invisible, existing in the cracks of a society that preferred not to see them. The reception area of City General Hospital was a study in contrasts. Cold marble floors, ergonomic chairs in the VIP area, impeccably dressed attendants for patients with premium insurance plans. For others, there were only broken plastic benches and indifferent stares. The girl carried in her thin arms the weight of the letter and the burden of the promise made to her mother. After hours in line, it was finally her turn. "Full name and insurance?" asked the receptionist without looking up from her computer. "We don't have insurance. My mother is very sick and—" "ER for uninsured, next building," the woman interrupted, already calling the next person in line. "But the ambulance doctor said that this hospital had the equipment she needs. Please." The receptionist sighed impatiently. "Next." Desperate, the girl went around the counter, trying to explain. A security guard appeared from nowhere, grabbing her arm with unnecessary force. "This is no place for beggars. Go to the ER for uninsured, they told you," he shouted, dragging her outside while her mother was taken to the public wing of the hospital complex. The afternoon wore on slowly. The girl, sitting on the cold floor of the hallway with her old coat folded as a makeshift pillow, watched the coming and going of doctors and nurses. No one saw her. When she tried to ask about her mother's condition, she received only evasive answers. Her cough had worsened, and spots of blood now dotted the scarf she used to cover her mouth. Meanwhile, the millionaire stepped out of his armored limousine, flanked by two assistants carrying briefcases full of documents. His dark suit contrasted with the calculated paleness of his expression. This was not a humanitarian visit, but a financial one. Numbers needed to be checked, new cuts analyzed. "The cost reduction report is ready for review," murmured one of the assistants, handing him perfectly organized documents. "The new triage policies have increased revenue by 32%. The millionaire smiled discreetly as he walked through the automatic doors. He was proud of his business philosophy. Hospitals were not charities, but businesses like any other. Efficiency meant profit, and sentimentality was an unproductive luxury. At the exact moment he entered the main lobby, the girl received the news that would shatter her world. An exhausted doctor with deep circles under his eyes approached her with that expression that children instinctively recognize. "I'm sorry," was all he said before hurrying away to the next case. Something broke inside her, a silent scream, a pain too sharp for tears. All that remained now was the crumpled letter in her pocket, her mother's last instruction. With her vision blurred by fever and despair, she saw the man in the impeccable suit crossing the lobby as if floating above the misery around him. Without thinking, she gathered her last strength and stumbled towards him. "My mom said if I died, I was supposed to give you this letter." The desperate cry cut through the air, momentarily silencing the chaos of the reception area. All heads turned. The paper extended in her trembling hand had dark stains of dried blood. The man stopped, stunned. The millionaire stared at the tiny, disheveled creature as if she were an anomaly in the perfectly ordered universe he had built around himself. His assistants quickly positioned themselves as human shields, while the security guard moved to remove what they considered a threat. "Wait!" ordered the millionaire in a controlled voice. Something in that scene awakened a distant echo in his memory. The girl, pale and trembling, extended the envelope with fingers that looked like dry twigs in winter. Hesitantly, he took the paper. The signature on the back made his blood run cold. He would recognize that handwriting anywhere, even after so many years, a name he had buried in the deepest layers of his memories, along with that part of himself capable of truly loving. "This has got to be some kind of scam," one of the assistants whispered in his ear. "They probably dug up your past and are trying to shake you down. Don't open it here. Let's call security and the lawyers." The suggestion was perfectly logical. His fortune made him a constant target for opportunists, but his eyes couldn't leave the girl's face. There was something familiar in those features, something that made his heart beat in a forgotten rhythm. "Take her to my office," he ordered abruptly, ignoring the shocked looks of his staff. "And get Dr. Oliveira up here, immediately." In the private elevator, the silence was palpable. The girl, huddled in the opposite corner, seemed more like a ghost than a child. Her thin body trembled under the tattered coat, and a persistent cough tainted the sterilized air of the cubicle. The millionaire watched her in the reflection of the mirror, unable to face her directly. "Sir, I must warn you that this could lead to serious legal complications," insisted the assistant, presenting a folder with security protocols. "At the very least, we need a legal team before any contact. She may be a pawn." The millionaire nodded mechanically. Yes, that was standard procedure. Protection, distancing, cold analysis of the facts. The same approach he had applied to all aspects of his life for years. The same one that had transformed him into one of the most powerful and feared men in the country. In the luxurious boardroom, the girl seemed like a misplaced object, a stain on an impeccable canvas. The icy air conditioning made her tremble even more. A nurse tried to approach her with a syringe, probably at the behest of one of the paranoid assistants. "No," ordered the millionaire, surprising everyone, including himself. "Leave us alone." "But, sir, the security protocols—" "Out!" he bellowed, in a rare moment of losing control. When the door closed, only he, the letter, and the girl remained. The silence weighed tons. With fingers he couldn't control, he opened the envelope. The words printed there were poisoned darts, each one piercing. The armor he had built over the years to protect himself from his own past. The letter told a story of abandonment, struggle, and illness. Of a nurse who had loved a young up-and-coming businessman. Of a pregnancy announced with joy and received with horror. Of a choice made in the name of incompatible worlds. Of a woman who had raised a daughter alone while battling a degenerative disease, always refusing to seek help from the man who had abandoned them. And it ended with a sentence that hit him like a bullet. "She has your eyes, and I hope she doesn't have your heart." The millionaire looked up at the girl. It was true. The same eyes he saw every morning in the mirror now stared back at him, not with the gleam of ambition he had cultivated, but with a mixture of fear, anger, and an exhaustion too profound for someone so young. "Where is your mother now?" he asked, his voice betraying an emotion he had long ago stopped allowing himself to feel. "She died. Today. Here in this hospital, while I was waiting in line." The silence that followed those words seemed to last an eternity. The millionaire watched the girl as if he were seeing an impossible puzzle to solve. For the first time in decades, he didn't know how to proceed. His empire had been built on quick and precise decisions, but now he was paralyzed. The girl had another coughing fit, this time so violent that her small body bent like a branch in a storm. Red spots splattered the spotless carpet. That vision broke the millionaire's trance, and he pressed the intercom. "Dr. Oliveira." "Now," he ordered dryly. While they waited, the millionaire paced the room like a caged animal. Fragments of the past returned in painful flashes. The young nurse's smile, her simple dreams that seemed so beautiful then. The terror he felt upon learning of the pregnancy. The calculated coldness with which he ended everything when his career began to take off. Incompatible worlds. The cowardly phrase he had used now sounded like a death sentence for 3 lives. The mother's, the daughter's, and perhaps the most devastating, the death of his own humanity. The doctor entered hastily, accompanied by a nurse. Both seemed confused by the unusual situation. "Examine her completely. I want to know exactly what she has," ordered the millionaire, retreating to the window to give space and, perhaps, emotional distance. Dr. Oliveira, an experienced man who had seen it all in his career, approached the girl with professional gentleness. His preliminary examination was meticulous. Temperature, blood pressure, auscultation, reflexes. "She needs a full workup, immediately. Suspect advanced stage tuberculosis, possible chronic malnutrition, and signs of extreme exhaustion," he diagnosed gravely. "I recommend admission to the pediatric ICU." "Do it," agreed the millionaire, still with his back to the scene. "Use my private floor." The doctor's expression didn't hide his surprise. The private floor was reserved exclusively for celebrities and politicians who paid astronomical sums for discretion and comfort. It had never been offered to a patient without resources. "Sir, I must remind you that standard procedures for indigent cases—" "She's not an indigent case," interrupted the millionaire, finally turning around. There was something different in his gaze, something his employees rarely witnessed. "She is—" The words died in his throat. What was she to him? an obligation, a guilt, an unwanted heir, an intruder in his meticulously planned life. "She is under my personal responsibility," he concluded finally. "I want hourly reports on her condition, and not a word about this to the press. Not one." While the nurse prepared the girl for transport, the millionaire remained distant, watching. There was an internal battle tearing him apart. Part of him wanted to hand everything over to the legal team to resolve, keep his distance, protect his reputation and his peace of mind. Another part, one he thought long dead, felt an inexplicable connection to that child. "Where are you taking me?" asked the girl, her fear palpable in her weakened voice. "To a place where they will take care of you," replied the nurse automatically. "And after? Where will I go after that?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. The future, something the millionaire always planned with surgical precision for his businesses, was a frightening unknown for that child. A future that he realized now was inextricably intertwined with his. After, he began, hesitantly approaching the gurney where they had placed her. "We'll take it one day at a time." It was the first time their eyes truly met. There was no longer the barrier of initial shock, just two human beings, one powerful, the other vulnerable, observing each other across a chasm of circumstances. "My mom said you never wanted to meet me," she said, with a frankness that only children and the dying allow themselves. "Why are you helping me now?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Why indeed? Out of guilt, out of obligation, out of a belated attempt at redemption. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied mechanically, resorting to the empty phrase he used in interviews about his rare philanthropic actions. The girl stared at him with a wisdom beyond her years. "My mom always did the right thing," she murmured. "And she died alone on a gurney in the hallway." As they wheeled her away, the millionaire remained still, those words echoing in his mind like a funeral knell, announcing the death of all his certainties. The following days passed in a blur of tests, treatments, and consultations with specialists. The millionaire converted an entire wing of the hospital into a kind of headquarters from which he commanded both his business and the girl's treatment. The best pulmonologists in the country were summoned. Equipment was imported in record time. The diagnosis was grim: multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis, aggravated by severe anemia and chronic malnutrition. The battle would be long, with an uncertain prognosis. Still, for the first time in years, the millionaire found himself completely focused on something other than profits and acquisitions. "The costs are astronomical," commented his CFO during an emergency meeting. "The board is concerned about the rumors. We need a strategy to contain the damage to the company's image." The millionaire observed the room full of executives, all awaiting his usual calculated response. Instead, he rose slowly. "The board is worried about rumors while a child is fighting for her life. Is that right?" The question hung in the air, like a threat. No one dared to answer. "Great, because I have an announcement to make. I am personally assuming all the costs of this case. And from today on, I will be reviewing our policy for treating uninsured patients." The statement caused a subdued stir among those present. It was a radical break with everything he had stood for until then. The millionaire ignored the discomfort in the room and left without further explanation. In the ICU room, he found the girl sleeping, connected to tubes and monitors. He sat in the armchair next to the bed, watching the almost imperceptible movements of her chest rising and falling. She seemed so fragile, so small against the white immensity of the hospital sheets. "She had a rough night," informed the head nurse, entering silently. "But she's a fighter." "Like her mother," he murmured almost to himself. The nurse hesitated. "Sir, her mother's belongings were collected from the public ward. I thought maybe the girl would want them when she wakes up." She handed him a simple plastic bag containing few items: a worn purse, some documents, a cheap wedding band, and a small photo album. The millionaire thanked her with a nod, and when he was alone, allowed himself to open the album. The first photo hit him like a physical blow. He and the nurse embraced, smiling, during a picnic in a park. He remembered that day, the scent of the flowers, the taste of the cheap wine they shared, the feeling that the world was a place full of possibilities. On the next page, a photo of her alone, already visibly pregnant, caressing her belly with a sad smile. The subsequent pages told the story of a girl growing up without a father. First steps, simple birthdays, school graduations. In each photo, just mother and daughter, always the two of them, against the world. "Who are you?" The weak voice startled him. The girl had woken up and was watching him with half-closed eyes. "I knew your mother a long time ago," he replied, closing the album quickly. "You're my father," she stated. It wasn't a question. The silence that followed weighed tons. Finally, he found his voice. "Yes. She never spoke badly about you," continued the girl, surprising him. "She just said you had chosen another path." Those words, so simple and devastating, tore down the last barriers in his heart. The generosity of that woman he had abandoned, who could have filled her daughter with hatred against him, but chose compassion. It was more than he could bear. "She should have told you the truth," he confessed, his voice choked. "That I was a coward, that I put money and power above everything else." The girl studied him intently. "And now, what do you choose now?" Before he could answer, the door opened abruptly. His lead attorney entered, accompanied by the head of security and a hospital social worker. "Sir, we need to talk in private," declared the attorney in an urgent tone. "There have been legal complications that require immediate attention." The millionaire realized what was happening. His own employees, fearful of the changes they perceived in him, were trying to protect him from himself, from his newly awakened conscience, from the bond he was beginning to form with that child. "The girl has no registered legal guardians," explained the social worker in a professional tone. "We need to initiate procedures for placement in the foster care system." "No!" The word came out like a roar. "She's staying with me." The millionaire's statement left the room in absolute silence. The attorney was the first to recover from the shock. "Sir, with all due respect, this is rash. We need to consider the legal implications. The adoption process is complex, and there's the aspect of public image." The millionaire rose slowly from the chair. There was a subtle yet profound transformation in him. Something in his posture, in his gaze, suggested not only the power to which everyone was accustomed, but a determination of a different nature. "I didn't mention adoption," he clarified, in a controlled voice. "She is my biological daughter." The revelation exploded in the room like a grenade. The attorney visibly paled, the social worker dropped her clipboard, and the head of security took an instinctive step back. The girl, from the bed, watched the scene with attentive eyes, despite her weakness. This changes everything," the attorney stammered. "We need DNA testing, proper documentation, a press strategy." "What we need," interrupted the millionaire firmly, "is privacy right now. Leave us." When everyone had left, a different silence filled the room. No longer tense, but expectant. The millionaire returned to the chair next to the bed, feeling strangely disarmed before that child. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured, surprising him. "My mom always said you were entitled to your life." Those words struck him like a dagger. The posthumous generosity of that woman he had abandoned was a more powerful accusation than any recrimination. "Your mother was extraordinary," he said finally, "and I was a fool not to recognize it." The girl stared at him for a long time before speaking. "She kept all your letters." "Letters?" he repeated, confused. "I never sent letters after." "Not the ones you sent, the ones she wrote to you, but never mailed." The millionaire felt his heart race. You have them." The girl nodded weakly. "In the blue box under her bed. All addressed, never sent, one for every birthday of mine." Something broke inside him, a dam holding back years of suppressed emotions. For the first time since his youth, he felt tears forming in his eyes. He didn't try to contain them. Why did she never send them? She said you had made your choice, and she respected that. Said some people aren't born to be parents. The girl paused, breathing with difficulty before continuing. "But always on. The week of my birthday, she stayed up all night writing. And she cried." The millionaire covered his face with his hands. Guilt was a living monster inside him, tearing every inch of his newly awakened soul. All the buildings he had built, all the companies he had bought, all the empire he had erected. None of it weighed in the balance against those never-sent letters, against the silent suffering of that woman, against the lonely childhood of this child. "On my last birthday," continued the girl, her voice weakening, "she couldn't write. Her hands trembled too much, so she dictated the letter to me. That's when she told me who you were." The heart monitor next to the bed registered a worrying acceleration. The millionaire rose, alarmed, ready to call the nurse, but the girl held his wrist with surprising strength. "Wait, I need to tell you what she said." Reluctantly, he sat down again. The girl took a deep breath, gathering strength. She said, "If something happens to me, look for your father. Not out of obligation on his part, but because everyone deserves a second chance. Even him." The impact of those words was like an earthquake shaking the foundations of everything he believed in. Second chance. A concept he had never applied in his business, where failures were punished with merciless dismissals. A concept he had never considered for himself, believing that his choices of the past were sealed forever. At that moment, the phone in his pocket vibrated insistently. He ignored it. Vibrations turned into rings. He continued ignoring it. Finally, the door opened, and his communications director entered. Pale. "Sir, we're facing a crisis. Somehow the story leaked to the press. They're saying the hospital tycoon found a secret daughter. There are reporters surrounding the building. We need an official statement immediately." The outside world, one he had controlled with mastery for so many years, was now invading this new, fragile universe he was just beginning to know. His first instinctive reaction was panic. His carefully constructed reputation, the value of his company's stock, the pending contracts. But then he looked at the girl in the bed, so small against the vastness of the medical equipment, so vulnerable. His daughter. "Tell them there will be no statements today," he replied, with a calmness that surprised even himself. "The hospital is closed to the press. But sir, the stock is already down 7% just with the rumors. The board is demanding." "The board can wait." When they were alone again, the millionaire looked at the girl with a clarity he had never experienced before. "I'm going to get those letters," he promised, "and I'm going to read every one of them. But now, you need to rest and recover." The girl nodded slightly, her eyes already heavy with medication. Before falling asleep, she murmured, "She never stopped loving you, you know." Those words accompanied him as he left the hospital through the back, avoiding the press. In his car, alone without the usual assistance, he drove to the humble neighborhood where, according to the documents found, his former partner had lived her last years. The small apartment was a silent testament to struggle and dignity. Peeling. Walls, but clean. Worn furniture meticulously organized, photographs carefully framed in makeshift frames. The millionaire moved through the space like an intruder in a sacred temple, feeling the weight of each object, of each choice made in scarcity. He found the blue box exactly where the girl had described. Inside it, 13 envelopes organized. By date, each addressed to him at the various addresses he had occupied over the years. She had followed him from a distance, always knowing where to find him, while he hadn't thought of her for decades. He sat on the simple bed and opened the first envelope with trembling hands. "Our baby was born today, a girl. She has your eyes." The words, blurred by old tears, transported him to a parallel universe, the one in which he hadn't run away, in which he had accepted fatherhood, in which he had known his daughter from day one. The subsequent letters narrated first steps, initial words, small childhood illnesses, beginnings of school years, always ending with variations of the same phrase. "She still doesn't ask about you. But when she asks, I will only tell her the truth, that you chose another path." The last letter, dictated on her deathbed, was different. In it, there was no longer the serenity of the previous ones, but a feverish urgency. "I am dying, and I'm afraid for her future. I never wanted you to be part of our life out of obligation, but now I have to think of her first. She is showing the same symptoms I have. She needs medical care that I can no longer provide. If something happens to me, she will take this letter to you. Please don't reject her. I'm not asking you to love her. That would be asking too much. Just save her." The millionaire let the letter fall from his trembling hands. What dignity in that woman, until the end, asking only for her daughter's survival, without demanding love or recognition. His phone rang again. It was his lead attorney. "Sir, the situation is escalating. The press got photos of you entering this address. They're speculating about your relationship with the deceased. Some shareholders are threatening lawsuits for omitting relevant information. We need an immediate strategy." "I need a few hours," he replied dryly, then hung up. When he returned to the hospital, he found a chaotic scene. Reporters were clustered at the main entrance. Employees were whispering in the hallways. On the 6th floor, where the girl's room was located, a security barrier had been established. The hospital CEO was waiting for him with a grave expression. "Sir, during your absence, we received a court order requesting the transfer of the minor to the temporary custody of the state. The social worker is already in the room to arrange the removal as soon as her condition is stabilized." The world seemed to collapse around him. "Who requested this?" "Apparently your ex-wife." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Of course, the woman he had abandoned when he achieved success, not the mother of his daughter, but the socialite he had married for convenience and connections, and whom he had divorced 3 years ago after a scandal involving mutual infidelity. A woman who knew his weaknesses and knew exactly how to hit him where it hurt most: his public image. "She claims concern for the child's well-being, considering your history as an absent father with your legitimate children," continued the CEO, visibly uncomfortable. "The press is having a field day with this." The millionaire entered his daughter's room like a contained storm. The social worker, a middle-aged woman with a determined expression, was preparing documents while the girl watched everything with frightened eyes. "What's happening?" asked the child when she saw him. "Nothing you need to worry about," he replied, trying to sound calm. He turned to the social worker. "Can we talk outside?" In the hallway, he kept his voice low but firm. "I'm not going to let them take her. Sir, I understand your position, but there's a legal process underway. Until your paternity and your capacity as a guardian are proven, the state has a duty to ensure the minor's well-being. She's sick. She needs continuous treatment, which will be provided in a suitable institution. We have excellent public hospitals." The irony of that statement didn't escape him. He who had transformed hospitals into profit machines cutting costs in public wards was now facing the consequences of his own policies. His phone vibrated with a message from the attorney. Your ex-wife agrees to withdraw the request upon a financial settlement. Amounts to be discussed. The anger rose in his throat like bile. Everything came down to this: money. The same money for which he had sacrificed his humanity for years. The same money that couldn't do anything for his daughter's mother, dying, alone in a hallway. But before he could formulate a response, he heard a sound that froze his blood. The high-pitched alarm of cardiac monitors in crisis, coming from his daughter's room. Doctors and nurses rushed in. Orders were shouted. The girl was convulsing in the bed, her small body arched in violent spasms, while the fever that had returned with full force consumed her last reserves. The millionaire was pushed out of the room, powerless for the first time in decades. In the hallway, he fell to his knees, something he had never done even in his most desperate moments of impoverished youth. "Please," he murmured to no one in particular, "please don't take her too." During the next 6 hours, the millionaire didn't move from the chair in front of the ICU room. Executives called incessantly. He turned off the phone. Lawyers sent urgent messages. He ignored them. The crisis in the stock markets deepened with every minute of his silence. It no longer mattered. At 4 in the morning, the chief of medicine came out of the room with an exhausted but relieved expression. "We managed to stabilize her. It was close, but she's incredibly strong. Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated. "She's sedated. She won't wake up for a few hours." And there's the court order. 5 minutes just to see her breathe. Something in the vulnerability of that normally untouchable man moved the doctor. 5 minutes. In the silence of the room, illuminated only by the monitors flashing rhythmically, the millionaire sat next to the bed, and for the first time in adult life, he prayed. Not the self-serving bargaining he had occasionally done in moments of business crisis, but a true surrender. "I don't know how to be a father," he whispered to the unconscious girl. "I never knew, but I'll learn. If you stay, I promise I'll learn." As he left, he found his lead attorney waiting. "Finally, I found you," sighed the man, visibly disturbed. "The situation is critical. The press found out everything. The old relationship, the abandonment, the mother's death in the hospital hallway. They're painting a devastating picture. The stock has plummeted 22%. The board has called an emergency meeting for this morning." The millionaire received that news with surprising calm. "And what do they want from me?" "A temporary leave of absence. A statement denying paternity while we await the tests. Basically, distance from the case until we can control the narrative." In other times, it would have been exactly what he would do, the calculated, cold, efficient move. Protect the investments, preserve the image, postpone emotional decisions. It was what he had always done. "No," he replied simply. The attorney blinked, confused. "What do you mean, no?" "I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to deny anything. And I'm not going to leave her alone again." "But sir, you've built this empire for decades. Are you going to let everything crumble for a situation that we don't even know is legitimate?" The millionaire looked at his distorted reflection in the hallway window. A man in a crumpled suit, with deep dark circles under his eyes and disheveled hair. Unrecognizable compared to the polished image he had cultivated for years. And, yet strangely more real than he had ever felt. "Call the press," he ordered suddenly. "What? I just explained." "A press conference, right here, in the hospital lobby, in 1 hour. Without preparation? Without a strategy? This is corporate." "Suicide." "Maybe," agreed the millionaire with a slight smile, "but it's the right thing to do." An hour later, the hospital lobby was swarming with journalists' cameras and microphones. Outside, a crowd was forming, curious employees, patients, and families, passers-by attracted by the spectacle. The murmur ceased when the millionaire appeared alone, without the usual entourage of aides. He approached the microphone and took a deep breath. "Thank you for coming. I don't have a prepared statement. I don't have a rehearsed strategy, just the truth." The cameras clicked frantically as he narrated everything: the relationship with the nurse, the pregnancy he had rejected for ambition, the abandonment, the belated discovery of his daughter, the mother's death in the hallways of his own hospital. "I have failed as a man, as a father, and even as a human being," he declared, his voice firm despite the evident emotion. "And now my daughter is fighting for her life a few floors above us, in part because the healthcare system that I helped turn into a business didn't serve her mother in time." An astonished silence hung over the assembly. Never had a businessman of that caliber made such a raw confession. "Starting today, everything changes, not just for me personally, but for all the institutions under my responsibility. I am creating a foundation in the name of my daughter's mother, dedicated to ensuring equal care in all hospitals in the network. And I also announce that 30% of the profits from all my companies will be directed to this cause." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd of journalists. "But above all," he continued, his voice now softer, "I want to say publicly something I should have said 13 years ago, that I acknowledge and recognize my daughter with pride and love, and that I will fight for her with every fiber of my being." As the reporters erupted in questions, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from the chief of medicine. "She's awake, and she's asking for you." The millionaire walked through the hospital corridors as if floating, oblivious to the glances, the flashes, the questions shouted in his direction. Something had changed fundamentally within him, a silent revolution that had transformed a man of numbers into a man of feelings. When he entered the room, he found the girl sitting in bed, more alert than he had seen her until then. A pale ray of morning sun illuminated her thin face, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. "You spoke on TV," she said simply. "I saw it on the nurse's monitor." He nodded, suddenly shy before that wise-eyed child. "I only told the truth. Mom told me that you were very good with words, that you could convince anyone of anything." The observation caught him off guard. It was true. His ability with words, with persuasion, had been one of the most powerful tools in his rise, often used to manipulate, to win. "This time, I wasn't trying to convince anyone," he responded honestly. "I just needed to say it, out loud." The girl studied him for a long time before speaking again. "They're going to take me away, aren't they?" The question hit him like a punch. The court order, the social worker, the custody process, all of that still hung over them, like an impending storm. "No," he stated, with a conviction that surprised both of them. "I'm not going to let that happen." "But that lady said you can't prove you're my father." "I can, and I will prove it. But even before the official results, I have this." He pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. "It's the birth certificate. Your mother put my full name as the father. She never denied the truth, even when I ran away from it." The door opened, and the social worker entered, accompanied by a court officer and the hospital director. "Sir," began the director nervously, "they have an order." "I know," interrupted the millionaire, rising, "but before you execute it, I would like you to read this." He handed the officer a document that his attorney had brought minutes before the press conference, an emergency petition contesting the court order, accompanied by the birth certificate and a formal request for temporary guardianship. "My legal team is in court right now, challenging the original order," he explained calmly. "And I also brought this." From a folder, he took a sealed envelope. "The preliminary results of the DNA test conducted last night with samples from me and her. You can verify the authenticity with the indicated laboratory." The social worker examined the documents with professional skepticism. Even with confirmation of paternity, there are serious questions about your capacity as a guardian, considering the history of abandonment. That's fair, he agreed, surprising her. That's why I'm proposing a settlement. In the next 30 minutes, he outlined a plan that left everyone speechless. He requested shared custody with the state for 6 months, during which time he would undergo regular evaluations of his parenting abilities. He committed to attending family therapy sessions and ensuring psychological support for his daughter during the transition. And, most importantly, he established a substantial foundation to reform the foster care system for vulnerable children, with a special focus on healthcare. I'm not asking for special treatment, he concluded, looking directly at the social worker. I'm asking for a chance to do the right thing, to be the father I never was before. Something in the raw sincerity of that man, so different from the arrogance everyone expected, touched even the experienced professional. I will forward your proposal to the judge, she said finally, but I warn you that the road will be difficult. You don't become a father overnight. I know that, he replied, turning his gaze to the girl who watched everything in silence, but I'm willing to learn, day after day. When they were alone again, a comfortable silence hung between them. Not the awkward silence of the first meetings, but something deeper, as if words were, at that moment, instruments too imperfect for what needed to be communicated. It was the girl who finally broke the silence. Are you really going to change? The question, so direct and essential, deserved nothing less than the absolute truth. I already have, he replied. The moment I read that blood-stained letter, something inside me transformed forever. You brought me back to life in a way. Made me remember the man I could have been. She considered his words with the gravity of someone much older. Mom said that people can change, but only when they decide for themselves, not because they're forced. Your mother was very wise, he smiled, like you. At that moment, a nurse entered, bringing the afternoon medication. She watched with surprise as the millionaire helped his daughter sit more comfortably, adjusting the pillows with clumsy but genuine care. The doctors say you'll be able to leave the ICU in 2 days if you continue to improve, commented the nurse as she checked the girl's vital signs. And where will I go after that? Asked the child, the question loaded with meanings far beyond the immediate physical destination. The millionaire felt the weight of that question. He had no easy answers. He couldn't make grand promises. The road ahead would be complicated, full of legal, emotional, and practical obstacles. But there was a certainty in his heart, a conviction that surpassed all doubts. Home, he replied simply. We're going home, together. The word together, so simple and so profound, hung in the air like a promise, not of a perfect or conflict-free future, but of a shared journey, of a path that this time he would not walk alone. 6 months later, the millionaire parked his car in front of the school. It was no longer the black limousine that used to transport him, but an ordinary vehicle chosen for practicality rather than status. He checked his watch. 15 minutes before the bell, enough time to mentally review the afternoon's to-do list. Follow-up doctor's appointment, swimming lesson, and then the dinner that he himself would prepare, following the basic instructions he had been learning in cooking classes on Tuesdays. His life had transformed in ways he had never imagined possible. The corporate empire continued to exist, but now managed by a competent team, while he dedicated only half of his time to business. The other half, the half he had discovered was infinitely more valuable, belonged entirely to his daughter. The road hadn't been easy. The first months brought immense challenges, lawsuits, questions about his ability as a father, the inevitable difficulties of mutual adaptation. There were days of frustration, moments of doubt, nights of insecurity. But in each obstacle, A certainty grew stronger. He was exactly where he should be. The bell rang, and the school doors opened like floodgates, releasing a noisy stream of children eager for the freedom of the afternoon. Among them, still thinner than the others, but with a healthy glow on her cheeks that months ago seemed hollowed. Out by illness came his daughter. She spotted him and waved, without the effusiveness of the other children, but with a smile that was worth more than all the contracts he had ever signed in his life. "How was your day?" he asked when she got into the car, carefully fastening her seatbelt, a gesture he had learned to check religiously. "Good. I got an A on the math test." "That's amazing," he smiled with genuine pride. The drive to the doctor's office was short, but precious. In those small daily interludes between school and activities, between appointments and obligations, he had learned the almost forgotten art of real conversation. One that didn't aim to persuade, impress, or manipulate, but simply to connect. "I have a surprise for you after the appointment," he commented, watching her from the corner of his eye. "What is it?" "If I tell you, it won't be a surprise anymore," he teased, reveling in the curiosity stamped on his daughter's face. A typically childish expression that took months to emerge from under the layers of maturity forced by a difficult life. The surprise was simple: the complete renovation of the old apartment where she had lived with her mother. Not to live there, the new house they shared was spacious and welcoming, but to transform it into the headquarters of the Aurora Foundation, named after her mother. The space would be the first of a network of support centers for single-parent families in vulnerable situations, offering everything from medical assistance to professional training. A way to honor not only the memory of that extraordinary woman, but also to try to repair, in some small way, the damage caused by years of indifference. In the doctor's waiting room, while they waited, the girl leafed through a children's magazine, absorbed in the colorful illustrations. The millionaire watched her with that mixture of fascination and reverence that still surprised him. How could something so small and seemingly fragile contain such strength? How could a child with no apparent power in the world have completely transformed an empire? "Did you know that today is exactly 6 months?" he commented softly. She raised her eyes from the magazine. "Since what?" "Since you gave me that letter at the hospital." A moment of silent understanding passed between them. 6 months since both their worlds had turned upside down. 6 months since he had learned the real meaning of the word value. "Sometimes I'm still scared," she confessed, with that direct honesty that was both a gift and a wound. "Of what?" "That you'll get tired, that you'll realize that being a father is too hard, that you'll go back to being how you were before." The confession hit him hard, but not with surprise. He knew that trust was fragile ground, especially for someone who had known abandonment so early in life. Each day was a new layer of foundation being built, slowly, patiently, consistently. "Can I tell you a secret?" he asked, leaning closer to her. "I'm also scared. Every day. Scared of not being good enough, of making mistakes, of disappointing you. Then why do you keep trying?" The question, so simple and so profound, made him smile. "Because I discovered something I never knew before. That love isn't a passive feeling, but an active choice that we make every day. And I choose you. Every day I choose to be your father, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She considered his words with that seriousness that moved him so much. Mom used to say something similar, that loving is choosing to stay, even when it would be easier to leave. "Your mother," he said softly, "was the wisest person I've ever known. And my biggest regret is not having recognized that in time." The conversation was interrupted by the doctor's call. The checkup was quick and positive. The recovery was progressing admirably. The medication would be gradually reduced in the coming months. As they left the office, the afternoon sun painted the city with golden tones. Instead of heading to the car, The millionaire suggested, "How about we walk to the ice cream parlor before we go see the surprise?" The route was short, just a few blocks. Not long ago, he would have considered absurd the idea of walking the streets like an ordinary person. Now those small moments of normality were his most precious treasure. "Can I ask you something?" said the girl as they walked. "Anything. Are you happier now or before, when you had a lot of money and no one to worry about?" The millionaire stopped, looking with admiration at that child who managed to formulate questions that adults avoided throughout their lives. "Before, I had success," he replied after a moment of reflection. "Now, I have meaning, and I discovered that they are completely different things." They continued walking hand in hand, his daughter's small hand in his, a constant reminder that true human connections are not built with contracts or transactions, but with consistent presence, with daily choices, with the courage to stay. On the horizon, the sun began to set, painting the sky with promises of a new tomorrow. A tomorrow that, for the first time in his life, the millionaire awaited not with calculated strategies or financial goals, but with simple and profound gratitude for the second chance he had received through a blood-stained letter and the courageous heart of a girl who had taught him the true meaning of wealth. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day.